Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and prattle on about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today, as commanded by my ever-wise patrons, whose ranks you can join for $1 a month, there's a link in the description below, I continue my dive into mermaids and popular culture. Now today I'm looking at something a bit, perhaps obscure, but I'm using it to look at changes in how mermaids were treated in literature after The Little Mermaid, which we'll be talking about next week, as opposed to their medieval and classical and ancient European myths. The Fisherman and His Soul was written by Oscar Wilde. It was published in 1891 as part of the book House of Pomegranates, which was a collection of fairy tales written by Mr. Wilde, supposedly for children. Although I should note that's disputed, as Mr. Wilde himself said this book was not intended for British children or even the British public. But that's a bit of a side issue there. The book was the second collection released under his name, the first being The Happy Prince and Other Tales in 1888, but we're not going to focus too heavily on that. I have linked a legal online copy to the story and to the House of Pomegranates below if you would like to read all of the stories, however, so please feel free to avail yourselves there. Now, as for Oscar Wilde, I'm not going to do his life any justice here. Just know that here's a man who lives up to his last name. He's mostly known for his short stories, his plays, witty quotes, and being criminally convicted of homosexuality in 1895. Now, we don't have time to get into all the details in this video, so I'm going to try and hit some high points here. He was born in Dublin in 1854, attended Trinity College in Dublin and Magdalen College in Oxford. He actually competed against Bram Stoker for the hand of Florence Balcombe and lost, but declared his 2 years with her the sweetest years of his youth. Later in 1895, the Marquess of Queensberry basically called him gay in public, to jump over a lot of nuance here, and Wilde sued him for slander. He did this against the advice of all of his friends, who told him that, yeah, the Marquis was way over the line, but if you take this to court, you're gonna get in trouble. You need to let it go. And he didn't listen. Now, the Marquis could have ended up in prison. That's how serious this was. So, in order to avoid that, he had to prove that he had said nothing but the truth. And, well, let's put it this way. Mr. Wilde walked into the courtroom to put this dude on trial, and he's the one who ended up in prison and doing hard labor for 2 years. After he was released, he would leave England and spend the rest of his time mostly in France and Italy, and he would die at the age of 46 in the year 1900 of meningitis. His best-known works are The Portrait of Dorian Gray, The Importance of Being Earnest, and Lady Windermere's Fan. This brief summary does not do his life or his work any justice, but if I get into it, we're going to end up spending at least 30 minutes talking about him, so I'm going to let it go and just move on here. Our story starts with a fisherman whose ability to feed himself is entirely dependent on which way the wind is blowing when he's fishing, and like any reasonable person, he hates that. He does get a stroke of luck one night when he catches a mermaid. She pleads for her release, stating that she is the daughter of the Sea King and on top of that, his only child. And he is more than happy to send her home, but he wants a favor. He wants her to return when he calls for her and sing for him. And she's in a little bit of disbelief. She's like, all you want for me to do is show up and sing. Is that right? And he's like, exactly. You see, this would have the benefit of luring fish to his ship, where he can catch them. And that means he's no longer dependent on the wind. And for a while, this partnership goes rather well for him, and she seems to enjoy it. But to use a slightly modern phrase, he catches feelings and falls in love with the mermaid. In this rush of feeling, he proposes to her, and she doesn't seem all that opposed to the idea, having spent a lot of time with him, but she sadly tells him it's impossible for a mermaid to marry a human man because mermaids don't have human souls, and, well, humans do have human souls. It's kind of right there in the name human soul, right? And this is a barrier that cannot be crossed. His response is, well, if that's what's separating us, I will of course get rid of my soul. You are worth more to me than my human soul. Of course, it's easy to say you'll get rid of your soul, but I don't know anyone who actually knows how to do that. And neither did the fisherman. So first he figures he'll go to the priest because priests are all about the soul and maybe they know how to get rid of it. Well, the priest thinks this is utter lunacy and tells him, no, the soul is the most important thing you have, and it's insanity to try to get rid of it. There's nothing good that comes from associating with mermaids and fauns out in the forest who have no souls. You need to forget all of this and refocus yourself on your eternal salvation. But the fisherman refuses to change his mind, because the love of the mermaid is worth it to him. Enraged, the priest drives him out of the church and basically casts him from the faith. And the fisherman isn't bothered by this. He goes, okay, well, merchants are experts at buying and selling things. I'll go to them. And he offers to sell the merchants his soul because, you know, if you're going to get rid of your soul, maybe you might as well make some coins, I guess. But the merchants laugh at him, say, the soul is worthless. You can't see it, you can't measure it, what are we going to do with it? Now, if you want to sell yourself into slavery, feel free to stop by, but otherwise, get out of here, kid, you're bothering me. At the end of his rope, he turns to witchcraft. Now, it just so happens there was a local witch who was kind of willing to help him with this problem, although like everyone else, she tries to talk him out of it, saying, hey, ditching your soul is actually a pretty awful thing to do. You don't want to do this. But he is dead set on this. So she'll help him if he dances with her at the next meeting of the witches, which is going to be attended by Satan himself, not that she mentions that little detail. Now, personally, I feel like this was a ploy on her part, because she dances with him and then drags him over to kneel to Satan. So I feel like she was trying to trick him into something that wouldn't end well for him. But when he approaches Satan, moved by some sort of obscure instinct, probably the prompting of that soul he's trying to get rid of, he makes the sign of the cross and invokes the name of Jesus, which causes Satan to flee like a scalded cat. The witch is upset by this, but lives up to her end of the deal, handing him a magic knife, telling him if he stands with his back to the moon and cuts away his shadow from his feet, he will have removed his human soul. Having finally been cast out of our protagonist, the soul speaks up, and it is aghast, and it begs him not to do this, but the fisherman will not be denied. So the soul finagles an agreement to meet once a year to try and talk the fisherman into changing his mind at that point. At this point, the soul heads out in a quest to find something that'll win back the fisherman. First, the soul travels far beyond Europe to find a mirror that grants all wisdom. But the fisherman refuses to trade love for wisdom. The second year, the soul ventures out and finds a magic ring that creates wealth beyond measure, but the fisherman refuses to trade love for wealth. On the third year, the soul just resorts to trickery, proclaiming that if the fisherman won't be reunited with his soul permanently, he should at least come on a little day trip to come see the world's greatest dancing girl. And the fisherman, who has turned down wisdom and wealth, goes, "Darn, it's been a while since I've seen a girl's feet, so I suppose a quick trip couldn't hurt." I'm sorry, I did not have foot fetishes being a hero's downfall on my bingo card for this series, but here we are. Oh boy. This leads to the soul and the fisherman reuniting, and the soul has been rendered heartless because the fisherman gave his heart to the mermaid. Metaphorically, he still has his physical heart. And the soul immediately starts leading the fisherman into evil actions until the fisherman calls out his own soul on this and says, "This is way too much. I'm going home." Only to find out the magical knife will only sever his soul once. And the fisherman falls into a wild depression and decides he needs to head home and see if the mermaid has any magic that will help him. At this point, the soul is desperate not to be cast out again and tries to tempt away the fisherman by pointing out all the good they could do now, instead of doing evil. But the fisherman declares all he wants to do is go under the sea home to his wife. And when he reaches the shore, he calls for his wife's help, but she does not respond. And undeterred, he builds a hut on the shore, ignores his soul, and every day just goes down to the shore and calls for his wife's help. And this, after a year, the mermaid responds. Her dead body washes up on the shore. The fisherman, mad with grief, blames himself and takes her body out into the tide and dies with her, drowning, but reconciles with his soul at the end and dies at peace. Which, wow. I'm going to encourage you guys to read this for yourself, because while the prose is very purple, I honestly really like this story. The story ends with the bodies of the fisherman and the mermaid being found by the priest and given a nameless burial in the pauper's field. Both of them together in the same grave. But a year later, a miracle occurs with flowers blooming everywhere on that field where those two were buried. And the priest, known for his sermons on God's wrath, finds himself only able to speak of God's love. And that leads him to repent his actions. He goes out, and in the end, he blesses the merfolk, the sea, the forest, and all the wild folk who dwell within it. Now, unlike a lot of the earlier medieval stories we covered, where mermaids had souls and even became Christians and attended church, in Wild Story, we see that the church and mermaids both maintain they have no soul. And I feel like this is an influence from The Little Mermaid, which was written 60 years prior to this. And that represents a sea change, if you'll excuse the pun, from older beliefs. We also see that romance, quote unquote, has taken center stage over all the other themes of mermaid myth. The mermaid, much like we'll see in The Little Mermaid, has lost any of the dark and predatory aspects of her nature so that she can serve as a better object and focus for love. In this story, she's not that much of a character. In fact, I would go to say she's not a character at all. She's just a focus for the love of the fisherman. It's still a major shift in how mermaids are presented here, because in medieval stories, even the ones where mermaids are benevolent, they're still dangerous. Like I said earlier, I encourage you to give this story a read because, 1, it's free, 2, it's like 22 pages. It'll take you, like, what, half an hour at most? It's very fantastical and kind of weird. Just be aware it's going to show its age at some points because it is over 120 years old. And we're going to see more of that in next week's story as well, The Little Mermaid. But for now, I think this is a good place to stop. I hope you found this informative, or at least entertaining, and if you did, please leave a like, comment, or even subscribe, as all of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm, dare be on his name. I'd like to give a special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest Patreon supporter. I really do hope you read this story, big guy. Next week, it's time to tackle the elephant seal on the beach. We're going to look at the written story, The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. And after that, we're going to go after the Disney movies. I hope you'll join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.